ScotRail Express is a TSW3 add-on made by Rivet Games, and released in January 2023. I've decided to remake my review on this route after the recent update, and because the original review was rubbish. This route includes the 47 miles of track between Edinburgh Waverley and Glasgow Queen Street via Falkirk High, with Glasgow and Edinburgh being the largest cities in Scotland. It takes place sometime after electrification in 2018, with the Hitachi-built Class 385 being the only train included, though I would have preferred the Class 380 Desiro or Class 365 Networker myself. As it's one of the post-TSW3 releases, ScotRail Express costs 57 New Zealand dollars at full price. That presents terrible value for money, and I suggest waiting until it's on a discount before picking it up yourself. I only bought it on release day because A, I generally like the theme of Modern Image UK routes, and B, I was curious to see what the Class 385 was like. The original Edinburgh to Glasgow route in TS Classic was made by Thomson Interactive, and released way back in March 2011. Back then, the route only had electrification between Edinburgh Waverley and Newbridge Junction, as that section was used by Class 334 Junipers, with Class 170 Turbostars being the dominant motive power on services to Glasgow before the electrics came along. Although that original add-on has not aged very well, and this remake does feature the extended platforms at Glasgow Queen Street, amongst other improvements, there are notable sections of track that were included on the original but are omitted on the TSW remake. Notable absentees include the line to Grangemouth Oil Refinery, that little branch up to Larbert and Stirling, as well as the alternative route via Falkirk Grahamston. In real life, ScotRail also runs services between Glasgow and Falkirk Grahamston that go via Springburn. Although it would have made the route a lot more interesting with increased service variation, I'm not really surprised that Rivet decided to leave out those aforementioned lines. Although at the very least, they could have just extended a branch to Alloa via Stirling, especially since they have Alloa services represented in timetable mode. The only service you can drive in full on this route is the Edinburgh to Glasgow one. Not helping the situation is the rather uninteresting terrain through which this main line runs, though there is at least one large viaduct between Newbridge Junction and Polmont that reminds me of Ribblehead Viaduct on the Settle and Carlisle line. If the devs were to ever add any branches to this route, I would prefer that addition to either be the Alloa branch or the Maryhill line to Anniesland. The latter is especially unusual because it is a high-density service run by diesel multiple units, and the stations are very close together, so that would provide a distinctly different driving experience from the 385. Because only one train was included, the rail activity on this route feels boring and predictable. In real life, you'll see a lot more than just the 385s on this line. For starters, you would also see Class 156 or 158 Sprinters and Class 43 HSTs at Glasgow Queen Street, as well as services from at least 5 other train operating companies at Edinburgh Waverley. It's hardly surprising that none of these other trains were included, because it would be a waste of time for the devs to model a train that would only be seen on short sections of the route. Scenery-wise, this route is borderline tolerable, although even that's pushing it. It certainly feels like I'm in Scotland, but I have seen better and worse from Rivet themselves. One part that has always annoyed me is the missing overhead wires at the eastern end of Edinburgh Park Station. I thought these would have been fixed when the route was patched recently, but they're still missing. There's also a basic AI-only depiction of the Edinburgh trams included, but this model depicts the wrong type of tram for the service. In real life, the Edinburgh trams are CAF Airbus 3s, not the same Stadler Variobahn that the Croydon Tramlink uses. Throughout the route, you'll see some little gimmicks like bugs flying around the station lights at night, and pianos that somehow play a tune on their own when you click on them, almost like Elton John stole SpongeBob's invisible spray. You'll also see working lifts at Edinburgh Park, though curiously no other station, from what I've noticed. I don't really see the point of those pianos that play themselves without moving their keys when they don't really add anything to the gameplay experience. One little addition I do like, although it isn't noticeable unless you're in the right place at the right time, is the sound of cannons being fired from Edinburgh Castle, which go off at 1300 hours. Some of the scenery detail is really quite basic, especially on the western side of Linlithgow station. As I was driving along, I noticed several spots that just had a flat grass texture and no proper foliage. But if you're driving from the cab view most of the time, you don't really notice the basic scenery all that much. It almost feels like the scenery was designed to be biased to the driver's view, like the ancient Glasgow Airport rail link route in Train Simulator. As stated previously, the Class 385 is the only train that comes with this route. Both variants of this class are included, namely the 3-car 385/0 and 4-car 385/1, with the latter including a first-class section and being used on the main Edinburgh to Glasgow service. On the other hand, the 3-car variant hasn't got a first-class section, and only appears on the Dunblane service outside of scenarios. Now I don't know about you, but I think the 385 is a very weird looking train. The gangway connector on the cab ends is disproportionately large, and there's that weird rounded attachment around the coupler, and the interior just feels really cramped, though I do like the look of the first class section. The cab isn't much better, with the driver's window feeling like the postbox syndrome they must have had on the APTE, or reminding me of the time Mr. Bean got stuck in a postbox. Indeed, I felt like I was getting tunnel vision the first few times I drove this thing in-game, and I wonder how drivers on the real 385s manage. This unit has a working Train Management System or TMS screen, which I initially didn't know how to turn on, but it turns out you have to hold the mouse cursor in a very specific spot. Once it's working, you can access the train's onboard functions, most notably the announcements. As far as I know, this is the first train in TSW to have working announcements, but I didn't work out how to use them until after that first review. The Class 385 is somewhat let down by its weak sound set. I thought the motor sounds were borderline tolerable, since Rivet did at least get the initial whine you hear on these modern Hitachi trains, but overall the in-game unit just doesn't sound right. And the subpar sounds kind of spoil the driving experience for me. Considering that Rivet still hasn't fixed the poor sounds on previous add-ons, such as the London Underground 1938 stock and Rhaetian Railway GE 4/4 Mark II from the Arosa line, I'm not surprised that they did a poor job on the 385. Generally I think Dovetail does a better job with the sounds, and that's really saying something. Only two other forms of motive power layer onto this route in timetable mode, namely the Class 314 from Cathcart Circle and the heavily weathered Class 66 plus Railhead Treatment train from the first Loco add-on bundle. The 314 only appears on a rail tour, so you'll still be seeing nothing but 385s most of the time, and I refuse to buy any part of that first Loco add-on bundle because it is nothing more than a lazy cash grab. The 385 does not layer onto the Cathcart Circle as, from what I gather, the route takes place prior to 2014, a few years before the first 385 was even built. But I would like to see the Class 380 made as an add-on for this route, especially since DTG acknowledged the existence of the German haggis with all these stop markers that have 380 written on them. Following the update, the driving experience on the Class 385 is much better than it was originally. The combined throttle and brake lever used to be very sluggish when you tried moving it. This made the driving experience rather annoying, but as part of the recent update, the lever was patched and it now responds very smoothly. This train has 4 power notches, but the braking side of the lever is smooth without notches.
All passengers must be in possession of a valid ticket. This train is for Edinburgh Waverley. The next station is Linlithgow.
From what I gather, these announcements are not entirely accurate to how they are in real life, but I still think they are a welcome addition, and I wouldn't mind seeing working announcements on future DLC. Neutral section functionality is also implemented on this train, with the purpose of neutral sections being to split up the sections of the overhead wires, though I can't remember why they do this. Even after revisiting it, I still think ScotRail Express is not a good route. While I'm happy that Rivet has come back and patched several things, especially the 385's throttle, the offering of a 47-mile long linear route with just one train included is still not good enough, especially with that crazy price. It takes less than an hour to cover the full route, which is made even more unfortunate by the largely unremarkable terrain. And you only need to do one full-length trip to experience all that this route has to offer. Unless you're a fan of modern British trains, like me, or you really like the real line, I don't recommend trying the ScotRail add-on out for yourself. If you want a better add-on from Rivet Games, I suggest the Islands Line 2022 pack. And no, that's not just because I'm a big fan of the 230s and 484s.